If people could please take their seats, if members could take their seats, we're going to get started. There has been a big accident on the Pike, so there are some folks that may be running a little late, but we're going to get started and then see where we are as we progress. So the Senate will come to order. All members, guests, and employees will rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Objection to proceeding with the orders of the day. The chair hears none. If there's no objection, one matter will be taken out of order. On page 1, calendar item 2, Senate number 9, the question comes on acceptance of the report. Do you want to speak on the main question? The Senator from Middlesex and Suffolk, Mr. DiDomenico.
Thank you, Madam President. I first want to thank you and the members of our Temporary Rules Committee for their work on today's agenda and the rules we have before us. I want to thank Senators Cream, Rodrigues, Brownsberger, Roush, Minority Attar, and Senator Fatman. As a committee, as you know, we held multiple meetings and had many productive conversations about how we can increase transparency, promote diversity, prevent harassment, and modernize our rules for the digital age. I'm grateful to every member who reached out to me and our committee throughout this process to share their thoughts on our rules and provide suggestions to improve the way we conduct our business in this chamber. As a result of this collaboration, I'm confident that the packages we are considering today lay the foundation for the thoughtful debate in our chamber, as well as a productive legislative session. The changes outlined in the Senate rules focus on 3 major components: anti-harassment, increased transparency, and the promotion of diversity. In light of the work of the 2018 Special Senate Committee to review the sexual harassment policies and procedures, chaired by the Senator from Salem, as well as input from several of our committee members, we have created stronger provisions such as 3 components. This package tightens existing protocols by creating a new rule, 11F, that explicitly defines harassment in the Senate handbook and requires training of all members and staff. Additionally, the rules proposal explicitly defines misconduct to include a violation of the Senate's anti-harassment policy. We were also able to build off the work of the Public Records Commission, chaired by the Senator from Milton, as well as feedback from our members of our committee. And they include many transparency components. The rules require the Senate committee give 72-hour public notice on hearings or executive sessions, with the clerk informing members and releasing information publicly. It also requires notice of Senate hearings to include contact information, so the public testimony may easily be submitted by electronic mail or physical mail. The package adds language to codify the existing practice of ensuring that copies of the Senate session broadcasts be made available to members and the public upon request in a timely manner. And it also requires offsetting revenue increases when amendments are filed to increase or reduce spending in excess of $15 million, Rule 27A. I'm also very proud to report that the rules proposal includes new components to recruit and retrain a diverse workforce by creating the position of Office of Diversity and Inclusion as part of the Senate Human Resources Department. Our committee also reviewed and revised the Joint Committee rules to make a handful of changes that seek to modernize our policy procedures and update our terminology. For example, we have changed the term chairman to chair to remove gender connotations with that term. And we have changed the Committee on Marijuana Policy to the Committee on Cannabis Policy to reflect the most current language used by the state. Furthermore, 1C has been changed to require that both chairs agree to the schedule of committee hearings and executive sessions so they don't conflict with Senate sessions or other committees. And I also want to thank the Senate President for a transparent and open policy when it came to putting all of our rules agenda together. Again, we had several meetings. We appointed a temporary committee. We had input from many members in this chamber. We had several caucuses on this as well. This is a very open and transparent policy, and this is a good sign for the many months ahead as we conduct business in this chamber. Thank you, Madam President.
The senator from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr.
Why, thank you, Madam President. It is wonderful to be here with you and our colleagues this morning on this very cold but vigorous and invigorating winter day as we debate some of the most important things that we can consider in this chamber, which are the rules which facilitate the debate and the practice of democracy that we engage in not only here, but in this building. And Madam President, I too want to thank you for appointing very quickly a temporary rules committee which was representative of the chamber broadly. And I want to thank all of the members not only on that committee, but the many members who were not on that committee who interacted with all of us so that we could get everyone's perspective to try to incorporate those perspectives into a set of rules that make our operations more efficient, more transparent, and certainly prevent and address the issue of harassment. And I want to thank the gentleman who just took his seat for being the chief architect of that committee and for his work to try to weave together all of the various perspectives that we brought to the table. Although I would say, Madam President, that on those subjects that I just described, there was a tremendous amount of consensus as to the goal, if not necessarily always the methodology. And so now, Madam President, we are poised with respect to both the joint rules and the Senate rules to move forward to have a discussion about how to make those rules the best that they can be at accomplishing what are clearly a set of shared goals. Now, Madam President, while I laud many of the things that were described by the temporary chairman of the Committee on Rules, who I mentioned just a moment ago did an outstanding job, there are also some elements of concern in this rules report. And for instance, Madam President, the gentleman cited the fact that putting restrictions on the amendments that members can offer is an act of transparency. I would argue that is an act of suppression, not only of the minority party, but of members generally. And I know that, Madam President, that the gentlelady from Newton is asking whether or not that mirrors the Uniform Commercial Code. I would suggest that it does not, nor does it have precedent in the rules, because it is not something that promotes transparency. It promotes restriction. And in addition, Madam President, we certainly could go further in these rules in increasing our transparency, in increasing our accountability, and, Madam President, I think we'd all agree that hopefully by the time we leave the chamber today, we can also make our rules stronger with regard to addressing the issues of harassment. And I am confident that working together we will be able to do that. So, Madam President, while we, I would say, are off to a good start, there are some things in the temporary rules report that are concerning. And over here in Minority ARC, we will be looking to not only make the rules more transparent, but also ensure that the rules are protective of the rights of every member in this chamber to be able to do what they must in terms of offering amendments and having input in the legislative process to be able to represent the interests of their constituents. And, Madam President, that is a proposition that is not only important for people in Minority ARC, it is important for people throughout the circle, because only by opening up the process can we make sure that it is a complete circle. So, Madam President, I look forward to the debate. I appreciate the work that's been done, and I hope that throughout the hours that come this morning and this afternoon, we will actually be able to strengthen and improve the package that now stands before us, both on the part of the joint rules and on the part of the Senate rules. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. The senator from Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth, Mr. Timilty, offers an amendment the clerk shall read.
By Mr. Timilty, improving access to records.
The senator from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, offers a further amendment that the clerk shall read.
Mr. Tarr, posting of committee roll call votes.
Madam President, are we debating the Senate rules or the joint rules?
The joint rules.
Timilty. Senator from Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth.
The senator from Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth, Mr. Timilty.
Thank you, Madam President, and through you to the members. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Madam President, for your unwavering commitment to the rules process. I would also like to thank our minority leader, the gentleman from Gloucester, for his work on shaping the rules for this 191st session of the Great and General Court. Thank you as well to the members of our temporary committee on rules, the chair, the gentleman from Everett, the vice chair, the gentlelady from Newton, the gentleman from Webster, our ranking member, the gentleman from Belmont, the gentlelady from Needham, and the gentleman from Westport. Thank you as well to my fellow members of the Special Legislative Commission on Public Records, including the gentlelady from Newton, the gentleman from Foxborough, the gentleman from Westfield, the gentlelady from Salem, who has been a driving force behind enhancing public access to public records since the inception of her distinguished career here in the Senate, and of course the gentleman from New Bedford. Many of these issues we have discussed during our commission hearings are incorporated into the rules and the amendments that we are here to address today. And finally, I would like to thank all of my colleagues in this distinguished body who have weighed in with their advocacy, ideas, and support for our efforts. Madam President, as you know, after an affirmative and enthusiastic vote by this body in July of 2016, an act to improve public records was enacted into law. Section 20 of this wide-ranging legislative article mandated the creation of a special legislative commission, and I quote, to examine the accessibility of information concerning the legislative process of the general court and the expansion of the definition of public records. That enabling legislation, Madam President, was a clear mandate by this body and the general court as a whole that the commission strive towards greater openness, transparency, and good government practices that are both expected and, in my opinion, rightfully demanded by the citizens of the Commonwealth. I bring up the work of this commission, of which I was honored to serve as the co-chair, Madam President, because it was the testimony received from the stakeholders during the course of 5 public hearings, along with sincere and frank discussions amongst all of our colleagues in both houses of the Massachusetts Great and General Court, that served as the impetus behind this amendment that we are considering today. As legislators, we are called upon to debate the substance of bills and initiatives. We are charged with representing our districts, and we are expected by the citizens of the Commonwealth to carefully consider and ultimately enact policy. I submit to you all that in a democracy, just as important as policy is the process. That to truly carry out our charge as a deliberative body, we must always do so in an open and transparent way that the framers of our Constitution envisioned. This amendment and many other measures that we are discussing today, Madam President, represent a sincere commitment by the Massachusetts State Senate that we will continue to shed light upon our process and encourage greater accountability for us all. In short, this amendment will make simple yet necessary changes to our rules governing the 191st session of the Great and General Court. As we organize ourselves in the coming weeks, the respective chairpeople of joint committees will begin a process to adopt specific rules that will govern the practices of each and every committee. Though each and every one of us, with the best of intentions, seek to forge agreements with our counterparts for expeditious adoption of committee rules, this amendment simply sets in place a process in which a standard of rules shall be provided by the House and Senate clerks if agreement is not reached between the respective chairs. This will allow committees to start receiving testimony and considering bills as quickly as possible in the event of an unfortunate and rare impasse between chairs regarding committee rules. Additionally, this amendment calls for a minimum 72-hour public notice for any public hearing called by a joint committee. It is imperative that those having an interest in specific bills and those that wish to advocate for or against legislation have necessary time to become aware of and to prepare for public hearings. To that end, Madam President, and to maximize the involvement and engagement of interested citizens of the Commonwealth, this amendment stipulates that each public hearing notice include an email address and physical address for the submission of written testimony to respective committees. Finally, Madam President, this amendment, if adopted and codified in our rules, calls upon each committee to publish on the public website of the Great and General Court the vote of each member on any and all recorded committee votes, whether that vote is conducted electronically or by roll call. Madam President, I am grateful to the people of the Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth District for the opportunity to serve in this distinguished body, the Massachusetts State Senate, and understand fully, as we all do, the trust that is placed in us by our constituents. We are all inspired by thousands of bills that have been filed in recent weeks and trust that we all will continue to debate these measures throughout this session in a bipartisan way with respect for each and every citizen of the Commonwealth that have sent us here. And we will do so with openness, transparency, and accountability. This is not a Democratic idea, nor is it a Republican idea. As each member of the Great and General Court is aware, this is simply good government. Madam President, I thank you once again for your commitment to these principles, your support, and your unwavering efforts on behalf of transparency and good government in the Commonwealth. Thank you, and when this is called, this initiative, I hope it is called by a call of the yeas and nays.
The senator from Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth, Mr. Timilty, moves that when a vote on this matter be taken, it be taken by a call of the yeas and nays. Those members joining with him in his request, please rise and be counted. Sufficient number of members having arisen, the yeas and nays will be ordered.
Senator from Essex and Middlesex.
The senator from Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr.
Thank you, Madam President, and through you, the members. Madam President, I rise also in support not only of this amendment, but the further amendment, which is actually what now pens before the Senate. But before I speak to that, Madam President, I want to congratulate and thank the gentleman from Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth for the outstanding work that he has done that has led us to the point of being able to, I hope, emphatically endorse the concepts that are reflected in this amendment. Madam President, the gentleman very skillfully and inclusively led the effort on the Open Records Commission to find ways that we could increase transparency in government and allow folks that may not be inside this building to be allowed to better understand what happens inside this building. He did yeoman's work and was very persistent in trying to produce a report that is largely reflected in the amendment that now stands before the Senate. And Madam President, it is critical that we allow folks, again, both inside this building and outside this building, to have ample time and opportunity to be able to review the operations of the legislative process. And so this particular amendment, by expanding the notice for committee hearings and by ensuring that roll call votes are posted electronically, not only reflect a common goal of this Senate and ones that this Senate has been persistent about over the last few Senate sessions, but they also, Madam President, set an outstanding precedent for what I hope will be themes that will carry throughout our discussion this morning and this afternoon about opening the process, allowing more time for review, and making sure that people have ample opportunity for engagement. And so, Madam President, while I hope the underlying amendment is adopted, and I congratulate the gentleman for his efforts in getting us to this point, I also rise in support of the further amendment, Amendment 1.1, which would require that the votes of committees be posted in a timely way, to wit, within 48 hours. So, Madam President, those votes can be noticed by people that are interested in the subject matter that they reflect in a way that closely corresponds to the time when the votes are taken, so that folks can remain engaged and attentive to the process and not have lingering committee votes that do not get posted on the internet for a long period of time. So the gentleman has an outstanding amendment. I think the further amendment makes it even stronger and punctuates the need for not only access to this information, but timely access to this information. So, Madam President, I hope that the further amendment is adopted, and predicting, Madam President, as it is so perhaps ill-advised to do, but predicting potential success for the further amendment, I also hope that the underlying amendment, as amended, will then be adopted as well. And so that we may be particularly emphatic about our support for these ideals. I would ask, Madam President, that when a vote is taken on the further amendment, it be taken by a call of the yeas and nays.
Senator from Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, moves that when a vote on this matter be taken, it be taken by a call of the yeas and nays. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays will be ordered.
Brief recess. Oh. Senator from
Yeah.
Middlesex.
The senator from Middlesex and Worcester, Mr. Eldridge.
Thank you, Madam President. And I rise in support of both the original amendment, Amendment 1, and the further amendment proposed by the minority leader. And I first just want to thank the gentleman from Everett for his leadership in chairing the Temporary Rules Committee and commend the members of the Temporary Rules Committee. I also want to commend the gentleman from Milton who co-chaired the Public Records Commission and did a terrific job and made sure that there was a Senate report on public records. And Madam President, I want to thank you as well for your leadership in making sure that the Senate continues to advocate for transparency. It is something that I've been very proud to see has been a hallmark of the Senate for many years. I want to echo the gentleman from Gloucester, the minority leader, in commenting that this truly is a bipartisan issue. Transparency is an issue that no political party has the domain over. It is so critical to make sure that the public has enough information to know about legislation that we're debating, to know where we stand on issues, including how we're voting within committee. And at least in my experience, Madam President, what I find is that just the fact that the public has more information, that the public knows where I stand on issues, even on issues that they disagree with me on, they appreciate my explanation of it, and more often than not, I will get the support of those constituents, again, even if they disagree with me on an issue. I think it's absolutely critical to emphasize that I think this is truly a bipartisan initiative. The minority leader talked about the leadership the Senate has showed in creating more transparency, and I just want to list a few examples from past sessions to really show how we have advanced transparency in the Senate, and I would argue for the whole legislature. And at least in my view, this really begins 3 sessions ago when we made the first measure under former Senate President Therese Murray to put roll calls online. So yes, for those who are newer to the Senate, there was a time in the Senate where roll calls by the Senate were not posted on websites. So that was a progress we made 3 sessions ago. 2 sessions ago, we made the change that there is no deadline for sponsoring Senate bills. So unlike the House, which has a firm deadline of tomorrow to co-sponsor House bills, there is no deadline to co-sponsor Senate bills. And that is so critical because we all have constituents that might not be particularly focused over the past 2 weeks on asking any one of us to co-sponsor a bill. The ability for a Senate bill to be co-sponsored at any time during the 2-year session before that bill is taken up is really critical to, in my opinion, empowering people across Massachusetts to be more engaged and to advocate for us to support bills. We also, Madam President, that session, again, 2 sessions ago, made an effort, unfortunately that was not successful, to say that if we're going to accept the joint committee structure, that the Senate chair of a joint committee should be able to report out Senate bills without getting the agreement of the House chair and vice versa. That's something that I still think in future years we should advocate for. I think it is a troubling reality, Madam President, that we have a joint committee structure which intrinsically creates an unfair advantage to House members because House members have more members on a joint committee. It slows down the progress of the Senate. And this isn't just theoretical. I want to look back to last session when we took the lead early on climate change, when we took the lead on health care, when we took the lead on protecting immigrants through passing the Safe Communities Act. All of those bills, we had to make an unusual unilateral effort to get those issues taken up by the Senate simply because the House chair for those respective subject matter committees would not agree for those bills to come out. In other words, there was a majority of Senate members on those committees that supported reporting out really critical bills that would affect the public, and yet we could not get those bills out towards the end of the session. That's really an unacceptable reality, and respectfully, I would ask in future sessions, we think about whether the joint committee structure really is working here in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts legislature is just one of a handful of legislatures that has a joint committee structure. I wonder if we would be better off on separate committees for the House and Senate. But that's an aside. I last want to mention the progress we made last session on moving up the reporting deadline for joint committee bills, and that was so critical, in my opinion, from having a successful session last session, because the reporting deadline for all bills in joint committees was moved up, and that was critical to getting bills out either to the House or Senate, getting these bills debated on the House or floor, and moving towards progress of actually passing these bills into legislation. I can't emphasize enough, Madam President, how critical accountability is. And although I know in Massachusetts we're very proud of saying we're the first in many areas, I don't think we're the first in accountability. I don't think we're the first in transparency in general in state government. I think the Massachusetts Senate has shown leadership on these issues, and that's why we've made so much progress. But there is so much more to be done. And by having these rules proposed today, Madam President, that would require that committee votes would be posted online to know where we stand on different issues, to have advance notice about the bills that are coming before us is so critical to making sure for more transparent and accountable government. I know that some of my colleagues sometimes question the value of transparency or accountability or wonder what it's really worth. I would say that if we're truly committed to restoring faith in state government, if we're truly committed to making sure the public knows we're absolutely committed to making progress in so many critical areas, part of the way that you restore faith in government is by making it transparent and open. And if that makes all of us in our professional lives a little more uncomfortable, to have to explain things more, or have to look a little more closely in bills, that's what we got elected to do, that's what we're supposed to do, and that will better serve the public, and I think will lead to a better product and legislation passing in this session and future sessions going forward. So again, I want to commend the gentleman from Milton for his tremendous work, co-chairing the commission that led in many ways to this amendment. I want to thank the minority leader for his further amendment, which I also support, and I urge my colleagues to vote for these amendments. Thank you.
The senator from 2nd Essex, Ms. Lovely.
Madam President, through you to the members, I too want to rise and commend the chair of the special commission that we sat on, also to commend the committee members for a tremendous amount of work that was done to get to this point. I also want to give a special thank you to the advocates that attended all of our commission meetings, because but for their testimony and recommendations and requests, these were actually what went into the Senate report, these recommendations. So I want to say a special thank you to them as well. But again, to the gentleman from Milton for his unwavering and strong leadership in this area, and for getting us here today to put these into our rules. Also to the minority leader for furthering this. It's an excellent further amendment. I look forward to supporting it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. This matter will be temporarily laid aside. Amendment number 2 is on hold. Amendment number 3,
Essex and Middlesex.
gentleman from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, has offered an amendment which the clerk shall read.
By Mr. Tarr. Conference Committee report.
Senator from Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr.
The senator from Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr.
Thank you, Madam President, and through you, the members. Madam President, because of the significance of this amendment, I want folks to have a little bit more opportunity to review it. It has nuances and depth that may not be readily apparent, and so, Madam President, I move that this particular amendment be temporarily held, and I encourage the membership to scrutinize it carefully in the time between now and when it returns for debate.
Okay. Amendment number 4, the gentleman from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, offers an amendment the clerk shall read.
By Mr. Tarr. Committee review.
The senator from Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr.
Thank you, Madam President. One of the very important components of the rules are authorizations that when committees are meeting or have the ability to meet when we are not in session, that they review all of the laws that are within the purview of the subject matter jurisdiction of that particular committee. That element of the rules has been present for a very long period of time, I suspect with the idea that we will understand that the things that we pass have an ongoing impact on the people of the Commonwealth, and we ought to always be vigilant to make sure that those things, whether they be special acts or general acts or parts of the budget, that they are having the impact that we intended. And thus far, the rules do say that, and the Temporary Rules Committee, or the Rules Committee report, says that as well. But, Madam President, this is an attempt to add another dimension that we haven't yet talked about in this discussion at all in the chamber, and that is the notion of cost effectiveness. And, Madam President, I know what a fan you are of cost effectiveness. I know that it is certainly one of the high priorities that you have for state government. And so not wanting for that to be omitted from the rules, this is merely an attempt to say that when the committees conduct those reviews, they will also consider the cost effectiveness of the laws that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the committee that is conducting the review. Madam President, I know how important this is for everyone, and so, Madam President, I know that this would be an obvious addition to the rules, and so I will speak no further except to say that I hope the amendment is adopted.
Question comes on adoption of the amendment. All those in favor say aye, opposed nay. The nays have it, and the amendment is not adopted. The senator from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, offers an amendment. The clerk shall read.
By Mr. Tarr, extension order.
He's standing.
The senator from Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr.
Well, Madam President, thank you so much. Madam President, one of the areas that we have engaged in as a Senate at trying to make progress on over the last several sessions, and in fact have achieved progress on, is the reasonable use of extension orders, which, Madam President, if not used judiciously and properly, can circumvent some of the very timelines that are important to making sure that we can carefully consider things seasonably in the legislative session, responding in part, at least, Madam President, to some of the issues that my good friend who last took his seat was explaining, that it is important that we not allow the timelines and the rules to be circumvented by unreasonable and indefensible extension orders. Now, Madam President, we have all worked as a body to try to limit the use of extension orders to time frames which are appropriate and to volumes which are appropriate, such that we very rarely see these days extension orders with vast numbers of bills, as we did not all that long ago. And so, Madam President, this particular amendment is an attempt to continue the progress that we have made on this particular subject by suggesting that an extension order will not be granted for more than 30 days, number one, and number two, that when a committee seeks an extension order, it will state in the order the reasons that it needs to extend, such that, Madam President, the orders cannot be used arbitrarily and, I dare say, perhaps nefariously, to be able to circumvent the rules. I know, Madam President, that we in this body have stood against that kind of abuse and that kind of inappropriate use of extension orders. This is an attempt to carry that concept even further so that we can have a predictable process that's responsive to the timelines that we've set out for ourselves and responsive to the expectations of every stakeholder in the legislative process that depends on extension orders to be used properly and not abused. Madam President, I hope the amendment is adopted.
Question comes on adoption of the amendment. All those in favor say aye, opposed nay. The nays have it, and the amendment is not adopted. The senator from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, offers an amendment. The clerk shall read.
By Mr. Tarr, intent of the general court.
First, senator from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr.
Why, thank you, Madam President. I know that how appreciative you were earlier that I raised the theme of cost effectiveness, and I know that perhaps we too quickly went past that concept in the prior amendment. This is an attempt to import the concept of cost effectiveness, again, in the reviews that are done by committees to make sure that the rules and the laws that we pass are truly cost effective. I'm sensing, Madam President, this one must have gotten by you the first time, and I didn't want you to miss that opportunity, nor the other members, to make a clear statement that not only are we interested in following the intent that we set out for rules, but that we also want the things that we pass to be cost effective. I know it was merely an oversight, so I'm offering an attempt to do that because again, I would not want the opportunity to get past us because I know this is a goal that we all share. In fact, Madam President, I can see from the delight that this amendment has obviously brought to many faces in the chamber that people are breathing a sigh of relief that we get another opportunity to respond to this particular priority, and I hope we'll take advantage of it this time. I hope the amendment is adopted.
Well, thank you. The question comes on adoption of the amendment. All those in favor say aye, opposed nay. The nays have it, and the amendment is not adopted. The senator from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, has an amendment. The clerk shall read.
By Mr. Tarr, posting of legislative documents.
Is he going
He just said keep going.
Okay.
Yep.
Question comes on adoption of the amendment. All those in favor say aye, opposed nay. The nays have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
Number 8 is withdrawn. Yep.
Number 8, drawn.
10 is on hold.
9.
9 is on.
The senator from Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr.
Thank you, Madam President. I move the Senate be in a brief recess.
Brief recess. Senate will be in session. Number 9, amendment number 9 is on hold. Amendment number 10. The senator from 1st Essex and Middlesex, Mr. Tarr, offers an amendment. The clerk shall read.
By Mr. Tarr, minority reports.
The senator from 1st Essex and Middlesex,